Hello, I'm Kimberley Leonard at the High Court in London for the Sky News Daily. Prince Harry arrived again here this morning to the world's waiting media. He's now finished giving evidence, and only moments ago, as we're recording this, he left. The camera crews are doing their final lives, the photographers are sending their pictures off and packing up, and the crowds have left too. Prince Harry spent a day and a half up against one of the country's toughest KCs, the Mirror Group's barrister, Mr. Andrew Green. And today we got even more details about Prince Harry's case, that the newspaper group obtained information about him illegally. He told the court about a tracking device he found on his ex-Chelsea Davies car. He said photographers knew he was meeting presenter Caroline Flack and questioned how they had that information. The Mirror Group denies the claims. Our team has been here for each day of this hearing, so if you want to catch up, you can find our previous podcasts where you found this one. I'm joined now by Sky's royal correspondent, Laura Bundock, and our reporter, Sarah Hajibagheri, who's been tweeting all day from the court, and media lawyer, Jonathan Goad. Thank you all so much to you. Laura, let's start with you. Day 2 of the cross-examination. What was the tone of the day today?
Well, I bumped into someone who'd been in court with Harry first thing in the morning, and they said it felt like he'd had his Weetabix. He kind of marched in, he strode in. There was a much more confident Prince Harry, I think. It had been a big day, and he'd handled the pressure, I think. People clearly happy with how he'd handled the pressure yesterday. He was calm, he was composed, he didn't lose his rag, and I think that had been a real worry as to how he would cope with the atmosphere in that court. It is intense.
Sarah, you were one of the few people who were actually in court for the entire cross-examination. What was it like in there? Just give us a sense.
It was 7 hours of quite arduous cross-examination. I think the scene was really quite something to see. It was the King's Son versus King's Counsel. A KC is like the top form of barrister that you can have in this country, and Andrew Green is a formidable barrister. He's also slightly intimidating. He's got a big presence about him, and he was questioning Prince Harry in a very robust manner over a day and a half. Things he was talking to him about were really intimate. One of the things he talked about today was Harry visiting Spearmint Rhino Strip Club. It was all very personal, but I thought Prince Harry handled himself really well over the past 7 hours. We think of Harry as this quite colourful character, but in court he was controlled, he was measured, and he kept his calm.
So how was the courtroom set up? Where was he? Where were you? Who else was in there?
So Court 15 of the Rolls Building of the High Court is a fairly intimate space. There are about 2 rows of journalists, one for each news organisation, and then a couple of members of the public, some of whom have been queuing from 4:30 this morning to try and get a spot in the public gallery, which in reality was just a couple of seats. Prince Harry was sat on the left at the far end of the court by the judge. He was sat in front of a lot of legal documents and bundles, and he had a computer screen in front of him where he could see some of those bundles. But if you're imagining a scene from perhaps Ally McBeal or something with dark wood and mahogany, I'm afraid it's a lot more modern inside there, and the setup is a little bit like a sixth form college. It doesn't necessarily feel like the traditional courtrooms that we might imagine, but there were of course the barristers in their wigs and gowns, but people weren't kind of patrolling the room as you often see in the films. It's a very controlled, very stage managed environment.
And there were members of the public in there, weren't there? What were they doing?
Trying to speak to Prince Harry in the breaks. A couple of them had brought copies of his autobiography Spare, hoping to get an autograph. Some of them shouted over to him that he was a hero, to keep going, to keep fighting. He just smiled, he didn't interact with any of them.
Laura, when Harry was giving his evidence today, he kept talking to the judge, didn't he? How did that go down, shall we say?
Well, it's unusual because that's not what someone in the witness stand is supposed to do. They're meant to be they don't ask questions, they're meant to be answering questions. And he was reined back in a little bit a couple of times when the Mirror Group barristers, Andrew Green, said, "You're asking me a question, I've reminded you about that." So that stopped. But yeah, he would sort of turn to the judge, and maybe it was a nerves thing, maybe it was sort of a don't quite know the protocol here. But that's not the kind of thing you'd normally see in cases here. But you did always get a sense that, and maybe it's because he's being addressed as Prince Harry, that this was a slightly different category of claimant. I mean, that was the point very early on that his barrister had said regarding why why he wasn't here on Monday. He had these travel and security issues that the other claimants don't have, etc. But this is unusual. He is a prince. He is a senior royal, son of the king, as Sarah was saying, and here he is at the High Court. So there was, the last royal got a special seat made of velvet when Edward VII, as Prince of Wales gave evidence, way back when. There wasn't a special velvet seat for Prince Harry, but I think, there were no exceptions made for him, but there was an awareness of who he was.
So, Jonathan, what happened today? What was Andrew Green's tack today?
Well, it was more or less the same through the day, and that's not being critical of him. So there were 33 articles, and it was Andrew Green's job to undermine the Prince's case that these articles must have been the product of unlawful information gathering. Once or twice, the KC made his ground, and Harry, showing, I thought, very good level sense and courtesy, accepted that he was probably right about that. But on a number of occasions, I think that the Prince stood his ground really well, and the most striking moment for me was an article about he was on holiday with Chelsea Davy. What the newspapers found out was his flight details going home. Now, very firmly he said there is no way legitimately that could have been obtained. It's a closely guarded secret. Nobody's told about it, and the reason for that is because of the security risk. And at that point, I think the KC was a bit wrong-footed, because he was not able to put forward to the judge any alternative explanation for that. So I think that was Harry's best moment.
And this isn't just about phone hacking, is it? This is about a lot of other unlawful gathering of information, blagging one of them.
Yes, it is. I mean, blagging is in case anyone doesn't know, is where you normally make a telephone call in to, say, to a hospital or to an airline and lie through your teeth and try and get out of them information which they wouldn't otherwise give out. The centre of this case has to be understood not just about those 33 articles. The basis of the claim is that Prince's private information had been stolen effectively through unlawful means. Now, whether it turned up in the newspaper or not is relevant, but the fundamental thing is that he was unlawfully eavesdropped on in various ways, and therefore his privacy was invaded, and that was a wrong which he suffered despite being a senior member of the royal family.
Just to reiterate that the Mirror does deny all the claims. Sarah, when you were in there and you were listening to all of this, you picked up on it earlier, these are moments, 20 years ago, very intimate moments. How did Prince Harry react to basically reliving them and reliving his reaction to them?
It was clear on his face that he was uncomfortable. I mean, nobody likes talking about their ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, and he was being asked very intimate questions about the breakdown of a relationship with a woman that he clearly loved. He looked weary, he looked tired, but he was answering questions for 7 hours. And if you take into account that he potentially only flew in on Sunday evening from LA, a West Coast flight, after a 2-year-old's birthday party, and then had one day to prepare before what would have been unlike any other royal interview we've ever seen before. I mean, this isn't a chat with James Corden on a bus in LA where you're talking about soft questions. These are really probing and hard-hitting questions, and deeply, deeply personal. And there were several moments that I saw him heavily sigh or blow out his cheeks. We often see Prince Harry, he has that characteristic biting of his bottom lip. He always does that when he's awkward or he feels a bit uncomfortable. He said before in interviews he doesn't necessarily feel comfortable speaking in public. We've heard a lot of him speak over the past couple of months, and I thought his voice was really markedly different from the voice that we heard narrating his audiobook in Spare. He was very quiet and I think self-conscious initially, but his confidence built up over the preceding hours.
He could have settled. He did not have to go in.
Yeah, he would have been, I'm sure he would have been offered, I mean, Jonathan will know better than me, but he would have been offered large sums of money not to have this happen.
Absolutely. They're absolutely certain. And I think one of the reasons why Jane Kerr was caught off guard was that my best guess is that when she wrote her witness statement, no one expected that this trial was going to happen. And so she may have written it thinking, well, that's it, my job's done.
Hold that thought. I'm going to bring Sarah in to explain who Jane Kerr is.
She's the former royal editor of The Mirror, and she was the second witness called after Prince Harry, after he left 7 hours of giving evidence himself. You might have thought he wanted to leave the court, but he didn't. He went and sat next to his solicitors, and he was very keen to hear her evidence because she is the author, or the bylined author, of 10 of the 33 articles that this whole case is centred upon. And the tone in the courtroom instantly changed. It was very combative. It was suddenly David Sherborne, who's Harry's barrister, on his feet and quizzing this journalist about how she got her stories. And it was really quite tense in there. And it was interesting to see Harry sitting, making notes, watching proceedings.
Let's go back to Jonathan now, because there were specific questions to Jane Kerr about the title she gave herself in her statement.
Well, yes, I was slightly puzzled by that. I mean, I'm not going to criticise David Sherborne's cross-examination because he's a master at it. It wasn't obvious to me what he was getting at. But the point was that, as he explained, an important part of her career history, which David Sherborne thought was important and should have been in her witness statement, wasn't there. And she wasn't really able to explain why it wasn't there. What he did is he contrasted her profile on some website, which made a big point of the fact that she was a news editor, with the fact that that didn't appear in the witness statement. So that was the second. I mean, the first bombshell was you didn't want to come here. The second one was it doesn't look like you were really owning up to the full extent of your responsibility. That was David's point. You were kind of trying to downplay the extent to which you were responsible. And I think that's the point that he was trying to make to the judge. It's going to, I think, turn much more on how she gets on in cross-examination than Prince Harry, because in the end Prince Harry wasn't doing it. I mean, obviously we're not assuming that it was done, but for the sake of this podcast, let's assume that Harry's right. Well,
again, the Mirror denies all claims.
Entirely, the Mirror denies all claims, and we'll find out what the judge has to say in due course. But the significance of Jane Kerr is that she was the one that was commissioning, apparently 900 times, one particular agency commissioning the work which Prince Harry says was done unlawfully. And one of the most extraordinary moments for me was when David Sherborne said, well, how did you know when you said in your witness statement, I never instructed anybody to do anything illegal? Well, how did you know? And she said, well, I never thought to ask. And he said, are you seriously saying that of all the information that you get in that looks private, it never occurred to you that there might have been some unlawful means of collecting it? And the answer to it, well, no, it never occurred to me. And I think at that point, the judge's jaw probably hit the desk.
It was always going to be hard for her, because the whole purpose of this cross-examination is for him to try and prove that if she was authorising all these invoices, did she not ever think to ask, is the activity I'm authorising here legal? Because we were told about this procurement policy that Mirror Group had that meant you can't sign off, clearly. I mean, it would make sense, but you can't sign an invoice if it's for something really dodgy, something illegal, something potentially criminal. And he was like, well, were you never asking? And she said, I think the answers were hard for her. She was sort of saying, well, I assume not. I had no reason to believe. And he was like, well, you had your own systems within the newsroom where you could do a search on somebody and you could get an address potentially. One system called Cameo came up. And he said, well, why would you need to engage other people to get any more information? What more could you be doing? And the dots he's trying to join up there is that these were the sorts of people who could do bigger bits of kind of digging, using, he alleges, these unlawful means. So finding out maiden names, potentially, of parents or family members, and that can give you access to information, or the blagging, the deception, deceitful way of kind of using someone's identity or information to get that private kind of content. And that's what he was trying to prove with her. And she didn't really have a reason as to why she'd engage these agencies, these people, without carrying out this sort of due checks on them. It was an assumption on her part that it was all above board.
Okay, let's take a quick breather to digest all of that, and we'll come back and discuss the wider implications of Harry's case. Hello again. Well, I'm back here with Laura, Jonathan and Sarah. And Sarah, I want to start with you. You were in there for the 2 days of his cross-examination. How do you think he did?
Well, he didn't mess up. He didn't get heated. He kept his cool. I thought it was really striking at the end of his kind of session today. David Sherborne asked him how he felt having to divulge all this information in open court for so long. And Harry at that point almost lost his composure. He paused, he looked down, and he said, "It's a lot." His face was flushed at this point, and he lowered his face behind a screen. But the very next question that he answers, his voice broke. And I think that was the moment, really, where we really saw him lose his composure a little bit. And we saw just how upset he must have been going through all of this stuff that had happened to him over 20 years ago, and you really saw how much of a toll it's taking on him emotionally. He didn't need to come to court. He put himself forward as a witness, and the statement he kept saying again and again in court was that he wished that more journalists had been doing so also.
Jonathan, do you think he's done enough to prove his case?
Well, if you're asking whether his own testimony was enough, well, no, but it was never expected to be enough. Doing my best to read the judge, doing my best to look at the evidence as best I can as a media lawyer, I think he has. Now, it's important to understand that there are 33 articles. Now, Harry gets a win if he even makes his ground on only one. Obviously, he'll be disappointed if it's only one, but the difficulty for the Mirror is they've got to knock down all 33.
Laura, the wider context within the royal family, how do you think that they're looking at this? Will they be watching this? Will they be reading the news on this? What do you think their reaction is?
I think Prince William will be very glad he settled his case against News Group, because he will not have wanted to go through that, and he clearly chose not to. Look, no, in seriousness, I think they will be aware of what was going on, but probably listening with their sort of hands part over their eyes, just in case, because let's be honest, we've heard a lot from Harry, haven't we, in recent months. You know, he has been talking at length about some very difficult, awkward moments and descriptions of things the royal family, I'm sure, would rather he hadn't mentioned. And when it came to them and what was said about them, I don't think there was anything that would have set off any alarm bells, not the likes of when we started to read Spare and how he viewed his stepmother, the Queen, all of this. It wasn't about them, really. It was about him, and obviously their names, some of them were brought into this, but not in the negative way that we've heard in the past. So I think there will be a relief that we've heard Harry speak and there's no kind of big moment for them, but they won't have liked it. This isn't how they do things. But this isn't about the damages. This isn't about the money for Harry. This is about the moment, basically. He might win here. Who knows? We're not going to know for a very long time. What does he actually gain from it? That's the bigger question. Is he going to bring about some kind of big reform of the media? He said, I want to change the media landscape. It's my life's work. This is a very big part of that. There are two other cases, obviously. This is the first one and a very significant one. But even if it's a win, has he won the bigger thing there to bring about the reform, the change that he thinks, as he puts it in his witness statement, will benefit us all? That's the bigger question here. I'm not sure he's going to win the court of public opinion. He won't be bothered about that in the UK. I think he feels it's too influenced by the newspapers who don't publish nice stories about him for various reasons and agendas. But where does it leave him? Where does it leave Meghan as well, who might want to restart her sort of career, her role in the US as well? All this matters, and it is important. So there are much bigger things going on here as well.
Okay, so Jonathan, what happens if Harry doesn't win?
It'll be very hard for him, I think. You strongly sense that the passion had started to build when he followed his mum's coffin, who he felt had been driven to her death by the tabloids. He's taken the most enormous risk. He's invested his own personal integrity, his own judgment in this. So I think it will be a bitter blow for him if he doesn't win, and maybe it'll make him rethink the claims that he's got against Associated Newspapers and the publishers of The Sun and The Sun on Sunday.
Okay, and the broader ramifications if he does win?
One of the points he makes very strongly in his witness statement is that we don't have a properly regulated press, so I think he will hope that this may be a sufficient prompt to the politicians to go back to the question of press regulation.
My thanks to Laura, Sarah and Jonathan, and to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Kimberley Leonard. This episode was produced by Annie Joyce with Sydney Peed. The editor is Paul Stanworth. And just to let you know, there's been a Sky News TV programme on each evening at 9 reflecting on the day's court proceedings. And you can watch those back on our YouTube channel.